Okay, I'm going to come back to the song, actually, at the end and tell you what that was about. I'm going to start by telling you about something that happened to me when I lived in Alaska. I don't know if that's going to go through. Oh, there we go. So I have some pictures just to help you imagine, and something to look at if you don't want to look at my face while I'm speaking. So when I lived in Alaska, just after Thanksgiving, which happens at the end of November, I dropped a friend of mine off at the airport, and I went to drive home to a place called the Kenai Peninsula, where I was living at the time. And when you drive from Anchorage to Kenai, it's about 3 hours, and the first part of the drive goes like this. And you've got frozen ocean on one side, sheer cliffs on the other side. I should point out that this was about 10 o'clock at night, and any time after 3 in the afternoon is pitch black in Alaska. So I'm driving in the dark, and I drive along the turning around, and I'm being really careful because it's a notorious spot for accidents, and I make it through. And the next part of the drive, you go up and you go through the mountains, and you have to watch out for avalanches up in the mountains because they can come down into the road, and then you get a bit stuck when that happens. So I carried on, and I made it through the pass, and I came down out of the pass into the flats. And when you get to the flats, on this particular night, it was thick fog, and I couldn't see more than about this far in front of me. So I slowed right down, and I crawled through, and I made it out the other side. And by now, it's sort of 12:30, coming up to 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm thinking about bed. And I'm thinking about tomorrow when I've got the day off, and what am I going to do with my day off? And being quite close to home, not really worrying too much about the drive anymore because I know where I am. And suddenly there's something large and brown and furry in my headlights. And a second later, everything's black. And everything's silent. And there's just this one little light that I can see. And it's this little light spinning right around here in my peripheral vision. I'm not quite sure what just happened, because I was driving along and I was listening to the radio, and I could see in my headlights and I could hear the radio, and now nothing. And it takes me a minute, and I figure out that this little light, it's that little map light that you have on your rear view mirror, the one that you just flip on. And what's happened is the rear view mirror's fallen down, and it's hanging by the cable, and it's just spinning. And the headlights have gone out, and the radio's been knocked off. And it takes me a minute, and I realize that big brown furry thing that I saw for just a second before I hit it was a moose. And I'm telling you this because this was the first time for me in my life that I had an experience where I had absolutely no idea what I was supposed to be doing. Just no frame of reference for this, no clue. What do you do when you've hit a moose? Never occurred to me to think about it before. Probably never occurred to most of you to think about it before. And it took me a minute, and I was kind of like, well, maybe I should see if I can find the moose. But if it's not dead, it's going to be really angry. So perhaps I don't want to find the moose. And then I thought, oh, no, I know what you're supposed to do in this situation. And so I scrabbled around, and I found my cell phone, and I called 911. And someone answered and said, 911, what's your emergency? And I said, oh, I've hit a moose at milepost 19 or whatever. And she went, oh my God, are you okay? And I thought, that's not quite what I wanted from trained professionals. I thought I was okay. Now I'm slightly concerned. But she sent a state trooper, and he came out, and he talked me through what you need to do. You need to call the tow truck, and you need to call the church to come and collect the moose, because that's what you do with dead moose in Alaska. And you need to call someone to drive you home. So he did all of these things, and that was all sorted out. And the moose, by the way, it goes to the church, and it's cut up into meat, and it's given to families that need extra food in the winter. So, I may have destroyed a car, but I did feed a few families in that incident. So there's positives in everything. So a couple of years later, I was living in Oregon, and I was engaged to this guy, Paul. He was a wonderful guy. And he had Ewing's sarcoma. And a little bit like that drive from Anchorage to Kenai, we'd been through the chemotherapy, and we'd been through the clinical trials, and we'd been through various different treatments and doctors and hospitals, and it was doing okay, and we were it was November time again, and we're coming up to Christmas, and we're kind of thinking about Christmas and not really focusing too much on anything else. And at this stage, Paul was doing radiation therapy, so we were going in every day. He was getting radiation for a tumor in his pelvis and in his spine, and it was going pretty well. And one morning he woke up, and half of his face was paralyzed. And I thought, I know first aid. That might be a stroke. So we went through the whole, face, arms, speech, time thing. And obviously, as the medical professional that first aid makes me decided that it wasn't a stroke, it was fine, and we'd have some breakfast and then we'd go to the hospital. So we had our breakfast and we went to his radiation appointment and we said to the nurse, she said, "Oh, how are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, well, I can't move half of my face." And she went, "Oh my God, that could be a stroke." We went, "Don't worry, we've ruled that out. It's not a stroke. We're pretty confident." Anyway, so she ruled out a stroke as well. And then he went and had his radiation therapy. And then we saw the doctor. And the doctor said, "I'm pretty sure that there's a tumor somewhere in your skull that's pushing on a facial nerve, and that's what's causing the paralysis. So we need to find it, and we need to treat it." So they did some scans, and they made one of those masks that you can bolt people's heads to the table with so they could treat it with radiation therapy. And so the next day we're back, and Paul's in the radiation therapy. And we've got this routine where when he's in having radiation therapy, I'm outside that big lead door. And there's sort of a bench that they keep some hospital linens on. And I just sit there with my book. I had Stephen King Under the Dome, which is about this big. So it's a good book if you're going to be sitting for a couple of hours a day reading. And so I'm sitting there reading my book, getting quite into it. And the doctor comes up to me. And this is just in the hallway, by the way. So there's other doctors and there's patients walking past. And he says, "You know that this is getting close to the end, don't you?" And I'm in my book, so I'm like, "No, I've got more than half of this. The dome just came down. I don't think we're near the end yet." And so I'm kind of looking at him like, "Sorry, what?" And he says, "Well, these tumors, they're popping up too fast, and we can't get ahead of them. We can't keep treating them." And the reason I told you that thing about hitting the moose is that feeling then, when I'm standing in the hallway and he's telling me that, was pretty much the same as when I hit that moose, in that I just had no idea what I was supposed to do next. What are you supposed to say to that? What are you supposed to do in response to that? And it was that same concept of just having no frame of reference to compare it to, and no idea what to do next. And one of the reasons that I had no idea, and hadn't really ever thought about this, was that palliative care, which we've heard a bit about from other people already today, is something that's quite widely misunderstood. And something that a lot of people view as end-of-life care, hospice care, respirators and feeding tubes, and also, more importantly, as giving up. Quite often people think you can't think about palliative care unless you're ready to give up. And so we hadn't thought about it. We hadn't given it any thought at all. And that meant that quite suddenly we had some big decisions to make in quite a short space of time and no idea where to get the information from. And so we went home. And I had to tell Paul, of course, because the doctor hadn't bothered to tell him. So we had a conversation. And we spoke to some friends who were doctors and friends who weren't doctors. And we spoke to some other doctors at the hospital and made some decisions. And one of the options was to continue with the radiation therapy, to see where he was at the end of it. And then there was an option to continue either with aggressive chemotherapy, with the hope of buying as much time as possible, but with a lot of it being in the hospital, or with a milder chemotherapy, which wouldn't buy as much time, but would allow him to stay out of the hospital more. So we thought about it and we talked about it, and ultimately it was Paul's decision. And Paul decided that he wanted to finish the radiation therapy and then see where he was. So we chose Radiation for Christmas, as the title may have given away. And we were very lucky in that there were some wonderful staff at the hospital we were at, and 2 radiation techs came in, gave up their Christmas morning, and came in to do radiation therapy. They literally came down to the car park and unlocked the building to let us in. And so we did do radiation on Christmas Day. Paul finished the treatment a couple of days later, just before New Year. And after New Year, when he was feeling a little bit better, the radiation therapy actually did pretty well. And it gave him more mobility and reduced his pain. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to tell you this story, is that was palliative care. So that was what a lot of people view as giving up or as end-of-life care. And what it meant for him was that he could get out of the hospital and he could actually do some things and have some fun. And that was what he chose to do. So in the hope of giving you just a slightly different perspective on palliative care and maybe encouraging people to remove a little bit of the stigma that goes with it, I just wanted to show you some pictures of what we did in what turned out to be the last couple of weeks of Paul's life. We drove 2,000 miles, or almost 2,000 miles, down the Pacific coast, and I'll just let the pictures speak for themselves on that.
So how you like me now? 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 Remember the time when I eat you up? Yeah, I was alive that you can't give up.
And going back to the song that I opened with, I don't know if you could hear the lyrics. The lyrics to or the title of that song is "How Do You Like Me Now?" And that was part of the soundtrack to this road trip. And we also went to see that band play live during this time, so that was why I chose that at the beginning. And that's the end. Thank you.